I'm Kelsey of Nested Sleep. Thank you so much for joining today. Today we're going to talk about all of some of the major sleep regressions across the ages, especially during the first few years of life when sleep regressions can be common. So we're going to go through and talk about these different developmental stages when your children are typically going to be experiencing some sleep regressions, how to know about each of them, and then also how to respond and teach appropriately the skills that they need to move forward and continue to get good sleep. So as we go through these different sleep regressions, there are certain points in development when your children are going to be more likely to experience some sleep regressions. But of course, there can be different things that can come up that can always cause some different problematic things to come up in regards to your children's sleep habits. Things like illness, teething, and other developmental things that can come up and just kind of get you off guard. So a lot of the different teaching moments and responding activities that we're going to talk about can also cover if you get out of whack due to any of those other types of regressions. These skills will work for those as well. So when your babies are first starting sleep, obviously the sleep is always going to be fragmented in the newborn stages, and that's due to all of their nutritional needs that they need during overnight and during the day. So we're going to be mostly covering children that are starting to have regression starting at around 4 months of age. And I'm sure many of you have heard of the 4-month sleep regression. So the 4-month sleep regression is the most commonly talked about sleep regression, and that's probably the case because most children have the 4-month sleep regression right around that time period, whereas the other regressions that we're talking about can go up and down and be different points in development depending on where your child is at developmentally. But the 4-month sleep regression, that is something, a physiological change, a change within the body, a change within the brain that does tend to happen at a certain state, at a certain point in time. The only kind of thing that would make it not happen at around 4 months of age would be if your child was born prematurely, then that would need to be adjusted for their age because it is something that is a change in the brain due to development. So the 4-month sleep regression, again, kind of the most common one that's most talked about. This is when your baby goes from sleeping very, very soundly. So they go from sleeping in REM sleep for the majority of their sleep time. That primarily is that you're having a lot of your growth hormones secreted and released during REM sleep. So there's a lot of rapid growth. They also need that sleep to happen, that REM sleep to happen more frequently because their sleep is more fragmented, different than adult sleep or older children's sleep. So your child's going from having lots and lots of REM sleep to when they get to be about 4 months of age, now rotating between the different cycles of sleep. So there's different stages of sleep that your child's going to be more likely to be stirred and woken up. They're going to start having a normal sleep cycle that then they'll have for the rest of their life. So that is a big change compared to newborn sleep, compared to when your baby becomes around 4 months of age. So that is something to know, that when we talk about things to know about the 4-month sleep regression, know that every single child will have the 4-month sleep regression. It just, every child will respond differently to it. So the actual change that's going on in the brain happens to every child across the board, but every child will respond a little bit differently. Now, some babies will respond differently if they do know independent sleep. So what independent sleep is, that they can fall asleep on their own at either bedtime or a nap time. So that's something to consider to just work on during the newborn time period, but it's not going to be mastered during that time period. So one thing you want to know in terms of responding is that typically when you're responding to a newborn, you're very frequently responding to their cues. If they're crying, they're typically, they're getting hungry, they're getting tired, one of those things, they have a dirty diaper, they're responding fairly rapidly. And as your baby gets closer to 4 months of age, you always want to think about pausing initially during sleep times before jumping immediately to get them. And that pause does not need to be a long stretch of time by any means. You just want to make sure you want to give them ample time to go through that sleep cycle. Go through and go into a different stage of sleep because they're going to be in and out. And if you look at a sleeping baby that is 4 months of age, it's not going to be, sleep doesn't always look like no disruption at all. You may see them yawn, you may see them stir or fidget. So you always want to pause and see if they are going to stay in sleep or become fully awake. In terms about teaching skills, you're going to want to teach those independent sleep skills. And those don't come immediately, but you're going to want to, during that first nap of the day, start to think about teaching those sleep skills, teaching that independent sleep when they're not overtired. So finding the right schedule for them, putting them down, giving them the opportunity to fall asleep on their own. Reach out if you have more questions on how to do that, but those are some of the skills you want to start teaching. Other types of sleep regression. So again, we have that 4-month sleep regression happening earlier in life. And then there can be another sleep regression that happens closer to 8 or 9 months of age. Now, this one is not a set in stone sleep regression. This one more depends on development. And so your child, usually when they're getting to be 8 or 9 months, is having a lot of rapid motor development. So they are starting to learn how to sit, potentially learning how to crawl, a lot of movement going on. They may even be starting to pull to stand. These are types of things that can cause some sleep disruption because before they could barely move around during sleep. And now if they're put in their crib to go to sleep, they could maybe look around a little more. They could crawl to one side of the crib. They may be sitting and not know how to lay down. Certain things like that can cause some regression in sleep. So what are some things to know during this time period? One, you want to make sure that your baby is tired and ready for sleep when they're going into sleep. Make sure they're on the right nap schedule, and look at my sleep resources if you need different nap schedules for age, but generally at around 8 or 9 months of age, your child should be at about a 2 nap a day schedule. So you want to make sure they're on a good nap schedule, they're ready for sleep. And then in terms of teaching, you want to be practicing some of those motor skills frequently during the day. So when your child is sitting up in one position, you want them to be comfortable getting down to laying, getting down to be able to go to sleep. So during the day, practicing skills such as sitting and putting a toy or object a little further away from them, so they do have to reach, they do have to learn those skills that are going to be helpful for sleep as well. Now, a lot of crossover being between a regression that could happen at about 8 or 9 months and a regression that could happen at around 12 months of age. So again, these aren't like set in stone, but babies around 12 months of age can again start to have a little bit of a sleep regression, often because of that motor development happening. So they're going through these different developmental changes. You're going to be wanting to practice those different changes. And so for example, if a child is now pulling to stand in their crib, you're not immediately, in terms of how to respond, you're not immediately going to want to lay them down to sleep. You want to make sure that they are practicing those skills and they do know how, but know that it can be normal for babies to start to kind of look like they're about to fall asleep, even standing, and then they will eventually bring themselves down to laying down. So not respond immediately to if they're standing and kind of don't know how to get back down, not responding immediately to lay them back down yourself, but giving them the opportunity to practice those skills. Then when your child is getting closer to 18 months of age, there can be some different things that start to creep in. Separation anxiety can start to creep in again. For sure, looking at separation anxiety peak points around 8 and 9 months, and then around 18 months that can be, it can happen at different points, but those points can definitely happen. And you want to obviously respond appropriately to your child, let them know you're there, but not change up sleep habits because of it. So if your child is screaming, when you put them down to bed, you're going to want to respond in an appropriate way and say, I love you, I'm right here with you, I can come check on you and you can see that I'm still here. But you don't necessarily want to, again, change up to all of a sudden staying in the room when you weren't before, because those are going to develop some more habits that you're going to need to, get away from later on. So you want to recognize the new thing that's happening developmentally and respond appropriately, but you don't want to drastically change those good sleep habits that you have in place. Then one of my favorites is around the 24 months of age or around 2, and this can be varied from 2 to 3 years. There's going to be a lot more testing boundaries and testing limits during this age group. So again, you can imagine, not a set in stone time, but just from a developmental standpoint, typically when you start to get into the 2s, you're going to see those different testing boundaries and testing limits. So for example, a child may climb out of the crib. So climbing out of the crib, oftentimes parents signal that to mean that they're ready for a toddler bed. But if your child is just freshly 2 years old, they are not usually ready for a toddler bed. In fact, they actually have not developed impulse control till closer to age 3.5. And so at this point, we are not going to want to put them in a space where they don't have the impulse control to, for example, stay in a room, stay in a bedroom. So remember to set those boundaries as parents, remember to set the limits as parents, but also give them the independence that they need. And that's something you can teach them, teaching them what they have choices over throughout the bedtime routine and around that process. For example, choosing their own book or choosing their own pajamas. You lay out some different options and they can choose. So it's still giving them some of that control, some of that independence to start to make choices, which of course is something we want to foster and develop throughout childhood. So I hope that was helpful to show you guys sleep regressions across these first few years of life, how to manage them, how to know about them, respond to them, and how to teach your children these various skills that they need to have good sleep. Thanks so much for joining, and hope you subscribe to learn more about sleep topics from children 0 to 18 years old. Thank you.